Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Joining us today is Jack Killion. Jack is an entrepreneur, growth strategist, educator, and coach. He's the founder and CEO of Street Smart Entrepreneurs and author of the book, Network All the Time, Everywhere with Everybody. Welcome, Jack. Tell us a little bit about your book.
I wrote the book a few years ago. I guess everybody wants to write a book and open a restaurant, right? Well, I haven't opened a restaurant, but I wrote the book. And I wrote it because I'm really passionate, and I think I'm pretty skilled at networking, which is something I had no idea how to do when I was about 30 years old. But it wasn't until I really went off and started on my entrepreneurial career that has now included starting 10 different companies that I was really forced to learn how to network and build, really strategic relationships. And I've just been doing it every day since, and I've finally gotten to be pretty good at it. So I wrote a book about it.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And you are obviously a long-term entrepreneur, starting a lot of companies, and I'm sure you've seen a lot with companies as well, and how they've evolved or not evolved over time. So today we're going to talk about corporate structure and how how that relates to the success of an organization. And one of the things, examples that comes to mind for me is now I just drew a blank on their name. Well, you mentioned Sears, so let's talk a little bit about Sears and how Sears didn't evolve their market strategy and their go-to-market strategy. What happened with them?
I think every time I hear amazing stories about Amazon, I feel badly for Sears, because Sears should have been the Amazon. They were the one who really had the idea to do full integrated catalogs, direct to consumer selling. And, they had that market to themselves, and they were world renowned for it. And when the internet came along, they never pivoted. They never adjusted to doing it online. And Jeff Bezos came in and ate their lunch.
Yeah, and I remember who I was thinking of. I was thinking of Blackberry. How Blackberry said that nobody would ever want to use a phone, a touchscreen phone, and then Apple came along and blew them out of the water. So, it sounds like this focus on evolution is extremely important.
Small, interesting story. When Blackberry first started, I was right in the process of launching a new magazine called Wireless for the Corporate User that was covering all the developments back in the early days of wireless and mobile voice and data communications. And the founders of Blackberry came to our office in New Jersey looking for some editorial help and, spreading the word about what they were doing. So I was involved in that right at the very early stages.
Yeah, when they were a game changer, and
Right.
and then they fell behind. I've been wondering about YouTube lately, and obviously YouTube was on the forefront of everything and sharing video. But I wonder if they've missed an opportunity when it comes to producing paid content. The way that like Netflix does or Amazon does. And I wonder if we'll see anything there where they're not quite as big as maybe they could have been, because they didn't, pivot just slightly. Like they didn't need a major pivot. It was more of like adding to their, a complementary product.
Right. I haven't thought about YouTube at all, so I'd have to give that some thought. But one of the things that I'm really very passionate about is the importance of companies having multiple revenue streams. And I think that can apply to almost any size, any type of organization. And that first registered with me. Back many years ago, I started the first national high quality country music magazine in America. And we started out, our business model was basically tied to selling advertising primarily to record companies. That was going to be 90% of our revenues. And then we had some additional revenues by selling single copies of the magazine and subscription. But the bulk of our business model was based on selling advertising. And after a couple of issues, it became very clear we were going to struggle if that was going to be what we stuck with. And if we didn't pivot, I didn't think we were going to make it. And we had been outside, raised money from a corporate strategic partner to get the thing going. So I started thinking about what other ways can we add revenues. So over a period of a few years, we went into book publishing. We probably published 40 books. We got very heavily involved in direct mail marketing, including our own products that we would produce or go get other products to sell through the magazine like Sears did with its catalog. We even produced direct mail country music catalogs. Eventually, we morphed into syndicating a weekly newspaper column in 200 newspapers. We got paid a fee to do that. And then we put together our own syndicated one hour once a week radio show that we got Suzuki Motorcycle to sponsor with us. And eventually we moved into producing our own records and tapes that we sold on television. We became one of the bigger marketers of records and tapes on television at the time. So in any business I've been in ever since, I'm looking for multiple revenue streams, which creates more opportunities for the organization, people in the organization. It buffers against market swings. It makes the property more valuable. So there's all kinds of advantages to it. And I think almost every size and every type of business can do it.
What do you think in how that ties to diversification? And what I mean is, obviously, the example you gave, they're all complementary kind of products within, kind of one, like a family of products. But then there's companies out there who diversify into completely different products or different services with mixed success. What have you seen around like diversification strategies?
At one point, I took over a failing family-owned manufacturing company. The day I took it over, the numbers stick in my little brain. The company had $23 in the bank and $23 and some change, and owed over $2 million, most of it personally guaranteed. And that was what was going on when I walked through the door. So I spent about 12 years turning that company around. And eventually, at the end of 12 years, I sold it to a public British company who had a diversification strategy. And they had three major silos of businesses that they wanted to be in: polymer processing equipment, small lab equipment, and processing in general. And I sold my manufacturing company into one of those silos, and I went on the board of the company. And in 3 years, we did 10 very diverse acquisitions. And at the end of 3 years, sold that whole company to a multi-billion-dollar British company. So I've been through both, diversification within the sector, as well as diversification across multiple silos. And it all comes down to leadership and good management and having the right business model for whatever business that we're talking about.
So when you think about, a company that's going along and they're doing all right, maybe they started out really strong and now they're just kind of maintaining. What are the indicators that they need to be looking at their business model and really evaluating whether or not they are going to maintain their viability?
I think maybe before I answer that, I should talk a little bit about what I think what is the business model. And over the last 45 years, in addition to starting my own different companies, I've literally looked at 1,000 deals. Somehow I'm in the stream of looking at deals. I see them almost every day. And there's a lot of reasons why some of them or most of them never make it or start and subsequently fail. And the business model, I think, is a big part of that. And the business model to me starts with, do you have a product or service that somebody really needs and wants and is willing to pay for? I've seen all kinds of companies sink because they haven't figured that out. And I personally have been guilty of, having to tweak what I thought our original product or service was. And then have you really identified the target audience you're going to go after? And again, I see a lot of companies that haven't done a good job at that. And again, I've been guilty of that myself, so I know what that feels like. And even if you've identified the right target audience, do you have a cost-effective way to get at it? And again, a lot of people identify the right audience, but it's not so easy to get to it. Like my current startup is called Street Smart Entrepreneurs, and we're targeting entrepreneurs, small and middle-sized company owners and managers. And that's, it's pretty clearly identified, but how do we get to each of those niches cost effectively? So product is important, the target audience, access to the audience. Do you have the right team in place to execute? And again, I see a lot of businesses fail because they don't have the right team. I'm about to be engaged by a company who wants me to help them raise some money. And my biggest concern is I don't think they have the team figured out to do what they want to do. And, they're digging their heels in as I start to push back and challenge whether they have the right people in place. And then do they have the right funding? I mean, you have to have enough funding to get through the tough times. And I find companies aren't always so good at figuring out how much they need. And then there's the timing right. There's a lot of examples of where the timing was good or bad. For example, with COVID, I think anybody in the camping business benefited from COVID because people still want to travel, but they want to travel safely. So there was, I think, a uptick in camping equipment being sold. And then you have to have enough capacity. You have to have flexible capacity. Like if I was in the business of building campers when COVID hit and I was limited in my factory capabilities, I couldn't take advantage of the opportunity. And then the final thing that I think about in terms of business model is the ability to stay flexible. I don't think you can start down one road and assume that's going to be the way it is. I mean, Western Union did that, and Sears Roebuck did that, and the Wells Fargo Pony Express did that. You have to be constantly rethinking your business model. And I think that's fundamental to good leadership.
Absolutely. How do you see though companies doing that in a like? Is there a structured method of approaching that, or I mean, how do companies like one review it and then two decide which direction to go? Do that, cost benefit analysis or options analysis and decide which way to go.
I'm not much on doing structured analysis.
Okay.
That's just not my personality. And I think in any organization, there are very few people who really make a difference. So it comes down to the difference makers really paying attention. And that's, again, where my emphasis on networking is so important. Because I estimate I spend a little bit more than 20% of my time meeting and talking to people. And most people would say, I don't have time to do that. Well, I think that's a terrible excuse. I think networking and spending time talking about your business and their business is one of the really high leverage ways to spend your time. And if you're out there talking to the right people all the time, every day, you're constantly getting feedback, you're getting exposed to new ideas, new opportunities, you're hearing about what's going on in your marketplace. I think, I've been to the White House 3 times. And on one of my visits, I went to a country music dinner that President Jimmy Carter hosted. He hosted a dinner for leaders in the country music industry because the industry was very important in terms of raising money for his campaign. So he wanted to have like a thank you dinner. And since I was the guy running the industry magazine, I got invited to go. And as the president worked his way around the room, he came to me and we spent about 5 or 10 minutes. And at the end of that 10 minutes, he said, Jack, I've got to work my way around the room. Is there anything else you'd like to ask me? And I said, yes, Mr. President. One thing. He said, what's that? I said, you're running this whole big international organization with hundreds of thousands of people working in the organization. How many difference makers do you have really helping you do that? People that you really depend on that can make a difference. He said, Jack, nobody's ever asked me that. I never thought about it. I'm not sure. How many would you think? I said, I haven't thought about it from your point of view. But if I had to guess, I would guess maybe 20. He said, if I had to guess, I would guess maybe 10. So in any organization, I think there are very few difference makers. And those people really have to be the ones who are paying attention to what's going on with their business. Is their business model, squeaking? Do they have to adjust it? And it always comes down to that. And I've seen it over and over in every size organization I've ever looked at.
What do you so we learn a lot from obviously failure. So can you tell us like what's been your greatest success in business and what lessons you learned from there, and what maybe is your greatest failure or your greatest learning from something not going the way you expected it to?
Knock on wood, I haven't really had any major business failures. I've hit bumps in the road, and I haven't had any gigantic successes like Amazon. I've never created an Amazon. Where I've run into trouble a couple times was picking the wrong partners. Mm-hmm. I probably have had 6 partnerships in my life, and of those, at least a couple didn't really work out. And I sort of had a gut feel in the beginning, but I went ahead anyway. But virtually of the 10 companies I've started, they've all made it to varying extents. I haven't had any tank. And I, except for the manufacturing company that was family owned that I had to take over, I've only pursued things that I was genuinely interested in. Mm-hmm. So I think having a passion is important. For example, I spent 20 years breeding and training racehorses, and I never grew up around horses. I just went to the track with my dad when I was a little kid, and I got interested. But I went into that with a passion, and I figured out a business model that enabled me to succeed for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Maybe the venture I started or got involved in that gave me the most satisfaction was saving the failing manufacturing company. Because when I walked through the door, I mentioned the company had no money, had big debt, only 10 or 12 employees, no successor in place, and I hadn't been involved in the business in 10 years. I didn't know the employees, I didn't know the customers. So I was walking in with sort of a clean slate. And I think getting that turned around and growing it into a pretty substantial company, I learned a lot of lessons. The lessons I learned were the need to adjust the business model, because after being there a month or so, I decided the business model was wrong. The company had been operating as though it was an industrial equipment manufacturing company, which for a whole bunch of reasons I thought was too narrow a definition of what we should be. So I started thinking about we should really evolve into being a polymer processing problem solver. And if we looked at ourselves in a broader way, we could start to do other things. So, for example, eventually I created a sister company called it was a laboratory development company. I put it in another location, actually put it in 3 locations: California, New Jersey, and Florida. And that company only offered lab services to Fortune 500 companies that wanted to use the type of equipment we were manufacturing to develop new polymers or new processes or new products. And then I evolved into organizing profit-producing live events as a way to promote the business. And I teamed up with the U.S. Department of Commerce. I got them to help us, and we put on events in multiple languages around the world. Again, going back to adjusting the business model. And that company evolved into one of the global leaders in the polymer processing sector. And if I hadn't sold that company, I was thinking about going into a publishing company and creating a new technically oriented magazine in the plastic processing industry. So you have to keep thinking all the time.
That ability to see, to scan the landscape and see what the need is and how the need could be filled by your company. Do you think that can be learned, or is that unique to certain people?
I don't think any of this stuff I'm talking about is unique. I'm hardly a unique person. I think it comes from simply wanting to, you have to have a constant thirst for learning. You have to be really passionate and interested about what you're doing. This is not 9 to 5, 5 days a week stuff. You sort of have to be living this all the time. And I think anybody can learn these skills. There's nothing unique about it. And practice makes perfect. I got to be good at networking by networking. And I used to be petrified. I went to great schools. I went to Yale, MIT, and Harvard. And I never learned it. And I was a blue collar guy going to those schools with all the when I went to Yale, it was all male, mostly from private high schools. And I come from this blue collar family from a public high school, and I was clearly out of step. And so, I lacked confidence. I certainly didn't reach out to people. I wasn't good at public speaking. I never could have done this back then. But, I had to force myself to change. And it wasn't until I quit my job at McKinsey to go off on my own that I realized I was going to have to forget my hangups. Nobody was going to call me. I had to start calling people, as awkward as it was, and as much as I hated it. My phone was not going to ring. So it started from necessity. So if your viewers and your listeners are struggling with things, you got to get out of your comfort zone and do whatever it takes to solve the problem, because nobody else is going to solve it for you.
Yeah, so that makes me think, what would you say are maybe the top three character traits of, whether it's successful entrepreneurs or somebody who can successfully lead a company through growth and scale?
I think one is passion for what you're doing. I don't think you can fake that. I think you generally have to be interested in adding value to other people and not look at situations from the point of view of what you get out of it. And I learned that lesson very early. If you're running an organization, you got to focus on all your other stakeholders and not you, your employees, your investors, your customers. So you got to be looking out, and you got to be a mother hen. You got to take care of everything and everybody. Then you have to be trustworthy. People have to be able to take you at your word. I don't think, I know I'm not clever enough and smart enough to put any kind of real agreement into writing. I think you can always get around an agreement, but it's pretty tough to get around a valid handshake. So I think you got to build trust, and you got to build, and none of us can do anything we're trying to accomplish basically alone. So I think you have to create strategic relationships and alliances. And that's where this networking comes in. I'm always looking to team up with people where I can add value, and maybe they can help me somehow. But you can't do things alone. Otherwise, you're doomed to stay small.
I 100% agree. You can't do things alone. In that, we aren't perfect in and of ourselves, right? We need the complementary skill sets. What are your thoughts, though? You mentioned having 6 partners throughout your career. partnerships good thing, bad thing, works either way? What are your thoughts around that?
Like the answer to all questions, it depends.
Yeah. You went to college.
It depends. I think it really boils down to the people involved. The very best partnerships I've ever had have been simply based on a handshake, nothing in writing. And one of them went for 15 years. And we were located in different states. I was in New Jersey, he was in Florida, and we just trusted each other. We each had access to the checkbooks, and never had an issue. I think one lesson I learned in one partnership is not only do you have to know the potential partner you're going into a relationship with, you better know their family situation, because sometimes the spouse, whether it's a he or she, can either be a big advantage in a partnership, or it can be something that really is harmful to a partnership. One of my partnerships that broke up because his spouse just couldn't buy into what we were trying to do. So I learned the lesson. Now if I think about going into business with somebody, I really want to get to know their family, and and have an open discussion about all the challenges we're going to face, all the pressures we're going to be under, all the disadvantages. I'd rather much undersell than oversell. I'd rather convince people not to do things than convince them to do things.
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be convincing somebody to go into business with you, because if they don't get excited about the vision on their own, then that's not
Correct.
somebody you want alongside. Um, and I kind of though look at these partnerships almost as difficult as marriage. I mean, it's the same level of communication, trust, all of those things.
At least as difficult. And I've been married a long time, so I've been through the bumps.
So, what are some of the things that you've seen that, what are the like red flags companies should be looking for in that maybe we're becoming irrelevant?
Well, I guess the obvious first one is revenues. You just can't grow revenues, and a shrinking customer base. For example, I got out of the horse racing industry, which was something I was really passionate about. I mean, back when I was doing that, I was 100% committed to doing that. I personally have delivered over 100 baby horses, so very hands-on. And I evolved into a pretty high leadership position in the entire industry. And I could see that the industry had a lot of problems with its basic business model. Very fractured, lots of separate silos, no coordinated marketing effort, lots of new competition coming in, casinos, online gambling. And I tried to get the industry leaders to change, and I couldn't affect any change. They thought I was crazy. I thought the horsemen should start to own the racetrack so we could control the theater. And I thought we should put together a national marketing organization to market the whole industry. And I thought we should have a commissioner of horse racing. Every other pro sport has a commissioner. And the horse racing industry has no leadership. So I just got fed up and basically exited industry that I was passionate about. So I think shrinking or stagnating revenues is one. I think the inability to hang on to good people, because eventually good people are going to look out for themselves. And if you're not developing an organization that really creates opportunities and treats people fairly, where they don't have any reason to leave. But if you start to see turnover of key people in the company, I mean, it's a huge red flag.
Mhm.
And I've always taken a lot of pride in trying to develop people. And it comes back to this concept of adding value to people. And I learned that lesson early on after we started Country Music Magazine, because At the time, I was running 4 different companies at once, 2 magazines, the family-owned manufacturing company I took over in the horse racing business. And we bought a 50-acre farm where I'm calling you from now. So 4 different businesses. I had to be at every one every day. And one day I came into Country Music Magazine as usual, walked right in, went right to my office, shut the door, and start doing whatever I was doing. And one of my 2 partners comes in, shuts the door, and he says, "Who do you think you are, Jack?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You come in here every day like you're the most important person in the world. You don't stop and say hello to anybody. You come in, shut your door, and do whatever you're doing in here." I said, "Give me 5, Spencer. That's the best lesson I'll ever learn." So from that point on, no matter what organization I've been in, I really make a point of walking around, talking to people, finding out what's going on. So you got to have that kind of leadership. And fortunately, I learned that at an early age.
Yeah, I had an experience like that. I worked in retail and, obviously you walk around the floor and you see a lot of things that need to get done. And so I walked up to this team member and said, "Hey, can you go take care of this for me?" And he's like, "Jana, it'd be nice if you like stopped and said hello and see what I have on my plate before you tell me what to do." And it was really awesome that he had the courage to say that to his boss. But that wasn't really a lesson for me that sometimes even now I still struggle with. I'll send a message rather than saying, "Hey, how are you today?" Whatever. I'll just say, "What's the status of this?" So, there's still times that I revert back, and I really have to, that's something I have to focus on a lot
But I
is
think
making sure.
everybody does. The world is going so fast. We're all under so many pressures, big plate of things to get done. But you still have to take time and smell the roses and be a decent human being and care about other people.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really good conversation, Jack. Can you, in closing, give our listeners 3 tips around, successful business models?
Make certain you really put your effort into producing and selling something that people really not only need but want. They got to be. They really have to want it, be willing to buy it, and make certain that you've really figured out who your customers are. And again, I could cite case after case of where that hasn't happened. And then the third thing is, spend a lot of your time just meeting people and building relationships and not keeping score. Just concentrate on adding value to everybody that you come into contact with, whether it's a little thing you do or whether it's a big thing you do. And somehow at the end of when we get all done with all this, they will that will pay off for you.
No,
Sorry for my phone ringing.
it's all right. No, great tips. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jack.
That's great. Thank you for the opportunity, and please reach out if there's anything I can do to help you or any of your viewers. That's what it's all
And
about.
how do our listeners find your book or connect with you?
They can connect with me at jack@streetsmartentrepreneurs.com with a hyphen between the street and the smart. And our website is www.streetsmartentrepreneurs, again with a hyphen.com. And I'd love to talk to any of you and see if I can add value.
Sounds great, Jack. Thanks again. And until
Thank
next
you.
time,
Safe
yeah.
trip back home.
Until next time, keep your companies healthy. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.